All right, I think we are at the assigned time. So, the closer, the final session of the final day of 2018. Thank you for lasting this long. This is advanced customization. Let me just start my timer here. Okay, this is advanced customization with the ArcGIS Pro SDK for .NET. I'm Charlie McLeod. This is my friend and colleague Steve Van Esch. Let's get cracking. So, this is an overview. We have custom project and application settings first, followed by how to modify the Pro project options. Then we're going to look at multiple add-in customization scenarios, first with .daml. We'll look at versioning issues. And then we'll get on to our final and most complex topic, categories and embeddable controls for plug-and-play UI. So, project settings first. Project settings are persisted in the project. They are persisted in the APRX. To implement custom project settings, you override two methods on your module. On-read settings async and on-write settings async. On-read settings async is called back if the project you opens contains custom settings. If it does not contain custom settings, it is not called. Your custom settings are saved to the project in on-write settings async, and that is called whenever a project is saved, whether from the UI or from the API. So, on-write settings async first, you're passed a single parameter of type module settings writer. Module settings writer has a dictionary semantic. It stores values as key value pairs. The keys must be unique. The values must be string. So if you have classes or other state that you wish to persist, you should make it serializable. Okay, and you can see here I have two settings, setting 1 and 2, and I'm storing two corresponding strings. Those are getting persisted into the project. Okay, on-read settings async, the project opens, it has custom settings for my module. My callback is called, I am passed a module settings reader. Has the same dictionary semantic. I provide the same keys to extract my custom settings as I used in the on-write settings. If I have custom state, I should deserialize accordingly. There is this little flag here, has settings. That's just a pattern you can use if you want to determine if your project actually contains custom settings. Okay? May be useful for you to know if a given project actually contained any of your custom settings. The way it works is this. When the on-read settings async is called, just set that flag to true. On-read settings async always precedes project opened event. So when the project opened event is called, you check the status of that flag. If it is false, it means you didn't have any custom settings. Apply whatever defaults are appropriate or whatever logic you have that depends on that. Just be sure in the closed event to set it back false. So that's just a little custom pattern if it's important for you to know if your project actually contains any custom settings or not. Application settings then. So application settings are not really anything to do with the Pro SDK at all. We piggyback off .NET property settings. We use a Visual Studio settings file item template. You'll get an app.config file added to your project. And then at runtime, your application settings are dynamically merged with whatever other application settings are being persisted in your user.config. And that'll be in your app data folder. And I'm going to demo both of these, of course. Once you've added that settings file to your project, just double click on it in Visual Studio. You'll get this Visual Designer. Simply type in the names of the properties that you want to persist. Give them a type, scope, value. Not really that important what these guys are. I think it's mostly self-explanatory. Visual Studio behind the covers will generate a settings class for you with the same properties. So if you add a file called settings1.settings, Visual Studio will magic up a class called settings1 for you. It'll have this default member, and then show last save. That's the custom property I typed in the designer. I just manipulate it like a regular class. There's a save method to persist those settings out to your user.config. Okay, so this is just straight up .NET. Okay, our first demo. Okay, so here is Pro, teed up, but a project is not currently open. Here is my add-in, Advanced Customization Start. I'm just going to point out a couple of things. First, this is the implementation of my onRead settings async callback. This is my onWrite settings async callback. Let's not worry about what it's doing yet. Just notice that I have a breakpoint placed in each. I have a custom class called Project Changes. What Project Changes does is it listens to the Project Items Changed event. The Project Items Changed event is fired in Pro whenever you change the content of your project, whether you add, modify, delete maps, layouts, styles, that kind of thing. Okay? I'm going to record those changes in a little custom class I call Project Change Entry, and then I'm just storing a list of those changes. I have a little flag here, Track Changes, which allows me to turn this behavior on or off. By default, I have it set to true. So I'm going to record all of the changes I make to the project. I've also got a doc pane where we can actually see those changes being recorded. All right, let's go to Pro, and I'm going to open a project. All right, the first thing to notice is what didn't happen. The breakpoint in my onRead settings async was not called, which means that this project currently does not have any custom settings, at least relevant for my add-in. So here's that doc pane. The only reason for this doc pane is to allow us to see, if you will, the changes in the project that I'm recording. Let's make a change. I'm going to add a new map. Project Items Changed event is called back. My track changes is true. I make a custom entry recording that change. In this case, I'm adding a map, recording the timestamp, who made the change, and then I'm storing it in my list. I show that change in the doc pane. Let's make another change. I'll delete that map. Okay, make another entry. Records that change. Someone removed a map. Okay, so just keeping an audit trail of all the changes in the project. I'll remove that breakpoint. I don't need it anymore. Okay, there's my second change. Okay, let's save the project. Okay, my onWrite settings async callback is called. I'm saving. Module settings writer. Into the module settings writer, I am going to store all of those changes made thus far. I'm persisting it to a JSON string, and I am giving it a key of change list. I'm also going to store the status of my track changes flag, currently true, and I will call that track changes. Okay? All right. Let's close the project and open another. Okay, the only thing significant about this project is that it allows me to go back and open my previous project. And now our onRead settings async is called. Okay, I have custom settings. I saved them. Okay, so I'm past the reader. There's my little has settings flag. I'm just recording the fact that I now have custom settings. Here's my project changes, change list. Okay. There's the JSON string that I persisted. I'm going to rehydrate those. Boom. Here's my track changes. Track changes, it was true. Yep, it's true, and then I'm going to set that back on my project changes class. Okay, so I'm going to rehydrate the custom settings. And then we see in the doc pane the changes I made the last time the project was open. Okay, all right. How about application settings? Okay. So, application settings then. Here's that settings1.settings file. I've already added it to my project. Okay, run that item template, Visual Studio. Yep. Here is the designer. Now I'm running in the debugger, so I can't actually edit this. It's read-only. But you can see that I typed in the name of a variable called show last save. I said it was true. I set the scope to user. The other scope is application. The only difference between the scope is you can have application settings be per user, or you can have application settings be for everybody on the machine. I'm per user, so this is my setting for when I use Pro. And I've had the default is set to false. Okay. I'm going to use this show last save in my module, and here I am listening to the project saved event. If my application setting show last save is true, I'm going to record the date and time of the last save, and I'm just going to show it on Pro's title. I'm just appending it to the title of my application right here. Okay? All right. So, let's go to Pro. I'm going to make a change. Let's see. I think what I'll do is I'll insert a layout. Okay. All right. Recorded the change. My project's dirty. I'm going to save. And okay, here's our project saved event. It's currently false. I'll just set it true. I don't have a way yet implemented to actually change it, so I'm just going to change it in the debugger. It's just a regular .NET class. Visual Studio generated for me. I'm going to set that true. And then I'm going to save it. So to save it, if you remember, I just used that built-in save method, and that persists it permanently to my user.config. So I've saved it. Now, because it's true, I'm just going to append the date time of the save to my application title. Okay? Like so. All right. Okay, let's go back to the slides. What we're going to look at next is we want to add some UI into the Pro options. We want to get into the project group a page that we can use to manipulate that track changes flag, to turn that behavior on and off, and a page into the application group where we're going to turn that show last save behavior on or off. Okay, that's the next section. And I'll stop, Pro. I don't need to run it. All right, Pro Options Property Sheet. So, to integrate into the Pro Options Property Sheet, we need to provide what we call a property page for both the project and application options. And to do that, we are going to use the Pro SDK Property Sheet Item Template. We need to modify the property sheet whose ID is Esri Core Options Property Sheet. We'll do that in our Config.daml. I'm going to show you all of that. So, you want to use the ArcGIS Pro Property Sheet Item Template. Run that template, and it will add to your project three things. It will add a property page view and view model. It's going to add a custom property sheet container. That property sheet container will be declared in your config.daml. And it is also going to give you a button that will allow you to show that custom property sheet container. In our case, we are modifying the Pro Options property sheet, so we don't need the button, we don't need the property sheet, we just need the page. So we can get rid of those other two. On the page is a view model pair. On the view, user control, we add our custom UI. Checkboxes, radios, combos, whatever it is that you want to host. In the view model, that derives from framework.contracts.page, put your code behind as needed, relevant for the content on your page in your control. You have some additional responsibility. I just have to pause for water here. You need to overwrite the commit async override from the framework.contracts.page. In the commit async override, that's where you're going to put your save logic. The item template is going to stub one out for you. And your commit async callback is called whenever the user clicks OK, meaning they want to keep the changes. There's one caveat. Your commit async override is only called if you have flagged your page as being dirty. So commit async is only called for those pages who have said their content has been changed. If you want to flag yourself as being changed, you need to set this inherited as modified property equal to true. I show a little code example here. I've got a variable called track changes. The user's changing it. And so because they changed it, they checked something on or off. I set my this.is modified equal to true. So my commit async will be called. There's an initialize async and uninitialized callback. That's called respectively when the page is opened or closed. Override those as needed. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of code by PowerPoint here. You've run the item template. You've got three things. You've got that button. You've got that custom property sheet, and then here's the page. The page is the bit we need this time. I don't need the sheet. I don't need the button. Okay? So I'm going to delete the button. I'm going to delete the sheet. I don't need it. But I am going to keep the page. Keep the page. Okay? Cut, copy, whatever. Keep the page. You need to add an update sheet element into the property sheets. Its ID is Esri Core Options Property Sheet. Paste in the page. And you want to be in the project group for the project options. So change group to project. Okay, you need to run the template a second time to make an application options page. Paste that in too. Its group needs to be application. Okay, let's take a look at that. Okay, same add-in. Let's go to the config.daml. Notice I have already added two property pages, one for my project options, one for my application options. We'll look at those in a second. In the config.daml, notice the template's added this property sheets element. Here's those two sheets, each with a corresponding page. Also, here are those buttons that I don't need. Okay? So let's go ahead and edit our DAML. So I need the pages. Let's keep the pages. One for project, one for application. I do not need the sheets. I don't need the buttons. I'd already commented them out just because I didn't want them to show up on the tab earlier on in the demo. But for you, they won't be commented out. Just delete them. Gone. Okay? So I don't need that stuff. Here's that update sheet element conveniently added so I don't have to type it in from scratch. You will not be so lucky. So update sheet, referencing Esri Core Options Property Sheet. I take my pages, cut, paste. Page is a shorthand for insert page. A lot of cases in DAML you don't actually have to physically add the insert. Notice I got that little blue squiggly. Update sheet is a stickler for the correct syntax, so I actually have to type insert page. Okay. The group. By default, the template puts you in group 1. This is my project options. I want to be in the project group. My application options, I want to be in the application group. Okay. If you forget to do that, you'll just notice a new group called Group 1 in the Pro Options sheet. when you first run it, and you'll fix it. Okay, and there's two captions, project tracking, save tracking. That's what I've called the pages. Okay? So that's the DAML. In my project options, I've gone ahead and added a checkbox, allowing me to toggle off and on the track changes. In the application options, I've added a checkbox, allowing me to toggle off and on that show last save behavior. Okay? And we'll look at the view models once we're running in the debugger. Okay? Okay, back to project 1. There's the changes we persisted. They've been reloaded. Okay, let's go to our options then. Okay, so there's our project tracking page. There is our application options page that we added in our config.daml. Let's take a look at project tracking. I'm going to make a change. Okay. Got a breakpoint set in the code behind of my project options page view model. This is the variable track changes bound to that checkbox. When I change its value, I'm setting my page, I'm setting it dirty. This dot is modified as true. I'm letting the sheet know a change has been made. Why don't you actually apply the change directly? Because the user might hit cancel. Okay? So you don't want to get ahead of yourself. User might cancel. They might change something and they cancel. So that's why this additional pattern, yes? Okay. We're accommodating cancel behavior, if you will. Save tracking. It's my application setting. Again, same thing. They've made a change. I'm flagging my page as dirty. I don't persist it immediately because the user may yet cancel. Okay, I'm not going to cancel. I say okay, all right. Flag my page as dirty. I'm in project options. My commit async is called. I record the change. I'm flagging the project as dirty. I want this change persisted in the project. Bad form to force a change on the project. You want to let the user decide that. They may have other things they don't want to save. But at least this way, if they close the project, they'll get prompted to save it, show that. Okay, but ultimately the choice is up to them. So I set my project dirty. That's my commit async. My application options. I do a little bit more work here. If the show last save was previously true and I set it false, I clear off the date. Then I set my application settings, show last save, with the variable value. And then I am persisting my application settings right here to the user.config. It's persisted immediately. Okay? All right. Let's get into the pro options. Notice when I close, boom. There's my prompt. I set my project dirty. Oh, I got to change. So, my choice. I'll say no. All right. Back to the slides. Okay, let's shift gears. We're going to talk about multiple add-in customization scenarios. We'll deal with versioning and also augmenting the capabilities of an add-in with another add-in. So, versioning your add-in could be that you have bug fixes that you want to deploy. The system already has your add-in on it. You somehow need to replace the existing add-in with another add-in. You may not even know if they have the add-in on it. So you need to version your add-in. There is a version attribute on the add-in info element in your config.daml. It follows the same convention as version on a .NET assembly, meaning it has 4 components. It has a major version, minor version, build, and revision in decreasing significance from left to right. So we have 5 versions of the same add-in here. Notice the revision trumps no revision, the build trumps revision, minor version trumps build, major version trumps minor version. And so in this case, last one wins. it doesn't matter what order they are loaded. Irrelevant. The latest version will be the one that is chosen. Okay? So, load order is irrelevant. Last version, latest version wins. Let's say that you have some core or basic functionality that you have previously deployed, and you want to enhance that with an additional add-in. For example, you want to add additional features to your tab. This is a straight-up DAML customization. You specify the module that you want to update. In this case, my advanced customization start add-in. In this case, I want to update a tab in that add-in. The tab advanced customization start tab 1. And into that, I want to insert a group in my extension add-in that contains those 3 buttons. So the DAML looks like this. If there is a load order dependency, that is to say that the extensibility add-in, your customization add-in, loads before the module it wants to update, you can deal with that with this dependencies tag. Simply say dependency, and then the ID of the add-in it is dependent on, this name element, this name attribute. And then in that case, the load order really will be irrelevant. I would just say, as a matter of course, you could always add that dependency tag. Then you never have to worry about load order. Okay? It just makes load order irrelevant. Okay. Categories. So categories. This is a pretty heavy topic. So stay with me. It is a custom extensibility mechanism. And it's for those scenarios where what you can do in DAML actually isn't enough. It's something other than updating a tab or updating a menu or updating a property sheet, right? It's your own custom extensibility mechanism. For example, maybe you have some add-in that provides some basic functionality. And over time, either for money or for whatever, you augment it with additional capabilities. Perhaps you provide a set of reports or some kind of analysis processes that maybe you load in a combo box as choices in your main add-in, okay? And on any given installation, the customer may have, you know, more or less of these particular options, depending on what they paid for or depending on what's been deployed. You really don't know. And you discover that at runtime, okay? So these are your own enhancements that somehow dynamically you want to discover and load and deal with. This is categories. There are 2 roles. The first is the host or owner role. That's pretty much your basic module, right? Your main module. The host is responsible for defining the category and for loading any customizations. The component provider, that's the other role, that's the one responsible for providing the customization, whatever it is. The custom report, the custom algorithm, the custom filter, whatever, okay? So the host then creates the category in the Config.daml. We'll see how to do that. The host is responsible for saying what it means to be in the category. Perhaps there has to be some kind of interface implemented. And then the host is also responsible for finding its components. It's going to use a method called categories.getComponentElements. And it is the host's responsibility to enforce any requirements it has. When you do update tab or update menu or whatnot, Framework did it all for you. I didn't show any code to figure out that at runtime there was an add-in that was updating that tab. That was done free of charge. In this case, we're doing the work. It's our category. We have to find the elements, okay, and determine whether we load them or not. Okay, how do you define the category? That's easy. Just simply put insert category give it an ID. So I've defined a category called test categories. I need to document what it means to be in my category. For example, category providers have to implement some kind of interface called my category provider. The component. They got to implement the component, just a regular .NET class. Implement any interfaces required by the category. Well, I said it's got to be my category provider, so they've got to do that. And then they register the component within the category in the config.daml. Components are instantiated by the host, so component providers are just passive. It's up to the host whether you ever get instantiated or not. Okay, another little code by PowerPoint exercise. So I'm the component provider. How do I register in a category? Okay, I add update category, and the category ID I want to update, test categories. I have to insert component. Insert component, I give it an ID, and then the class name attribute points to the code behind that implements that component. I must have a content child element. That is required. So that's the minimum. The host can also have optional XML attributes, XML content, whatever. So in this case, the host says, well, providers have to give me a version, a name, and a label, description, whatever. Okay? So these are just arbitrarily added to that content element. And then it's got an arbitrary child element called param1. We'll see how you retrieve that. So in the host add-in, probably in the module initialize, that's where you're going to read your category to see what is registered in it. And you will call categories.getComponentElements with the ID of your category, test categories. You're going to get an enumeration of all the component elements that are registered in your category in the respective config.damls that were found on a given system. Then for each component element, you can query it for its get content. That's the content element, returned as an xml.link.xelement, so you can query it for attributes, you can query it for child content, whatever it is you expect to find. And then you can call component.createComponent to actually instantiate the physical code behind that implements that category, right? Kind of looks like this. So I'm in the host. This is my module initialized. In my module, I'm keeping a list of all of the my category providers, right? That's my components that are registered in my category. I'm getting all of the component elements. My category's test category. I get their XML content. So this is that XML link.xelement. I get the version attribute. I get that child param1 content element, totally custom. What happens if they don't have a version or name or whatever? It's up to me. I throw an exception. I log it, whatever I do. You know, my rules. I'm the host. Here I instantiate the actual component instance, and I want to check it for the presence of my category provider interface. If it checks out, I save it, my list, and loop through the next one. Okay? That's the basic pattern. Okay? I interrogate my category, get the components that are registered, I check them, and then I keep the ones that I'm interested in. Okay? So this is the host workflow. But wait, there's more. So, what if you want an extensibility mechanism and you want to provide an extensible UI? You want to host dynamically some kind of extensible UI. Maybe that set of reports that you offer optionally has some little configuration screen you want to show, like check title, name, these are the fields, whatever. I mean, there could be any number of reasons why a given component needs to show a little piece of UI. You are going to use a pattern called embeddable controls. Okay, so We have actually talked about embeddable controls before in the Pro SDK. If any of you have been to our classes where we talk about map tools, what we show is making a map tool, and then you can actually have this embeddable control. When the map tool is activated, boop, this piece of custom UI pops up on top of the map view, and then when you deactivate the map tool, it disappears, it goes away. That's an embeddable control. You've just never taught it in the context of categories before. So an embeddable control is simply just a view model pair. It's an arbitrary user control paired with a view model. The view model derives from contracts.embeddable control. As the host, define the category. That's not different. You need any custom interfaces implemented, XML content, same as before. The only difference is now providers need to register embeddable controls in the category. And when I say providers, in 9 times out of 10, you guys are both the host and the provider. I mean, you're writing your own systems, so you may have all of this in a single solution. You are extending your own code, okay? So it's not necessarily that you're a third party and there's another third party extending you, though that's totally possible. This is your own extensibility mechanism as you're kind of growing your module over time. As the provider then, instead of having a vanilla .NET class, you're just going to use the embeddable control template. Any required interfaces, just implement them on the view model. And then register the embeddable control in the category, not the vanilla .NET class. What does that look like? Looks like this. When you run that embeddable control item template, the good news is it pretty much just gives you this exact DAML right out of the box. The only difference is in this ref ID will be Esri embeddable controls. In this case, I switch it out for test category. Basically, map tools and embeddable controls are working through the same mechanism that we're teaching you here. That's how a map tool discovers if it has any UI associated with it. Sometimes it might not. It's using categories. In fact, categories are used pretty extensively by Pro. Okay. In the insert component, this is pretty much the same. The only difference is that class, that's my embeddable control view model. The content, that class is my user control. And then I can just add in the custom attributes that I had before, version, name, label, whatever. It doesn't matter. You may have some, you may have none. And then I've got this custom param1 element. Okay, I just added that back. Okay. In the host get component elements, that's the same. This is the difference. We'll see it in the little code example. I use embeddable control.create, not create component. An embeddable control create gives me 2 things. It's got to give me the view model and the view. The embeddable control and the user control. That's why it's a tuple. And then I'm going to check the embeddable control for any required interfaces. Looks like this. Here's my list. I got pairs now, pairs of I'm my category provider, that's my embeddable control view model, and my user control, that's my view. I'm getting my components out of the category, no different. I'm getting my XML content, same as before, no different. This is the change. Embeddable control.create. I provide the ID of the component I want to create and the category. Test categories. Null and false, ignore those. It's not important what they do, just leave them like that. I test the first item in the pair, the view model, for my category provider interface. It's good. I keep the pair. Somewhere else in my module, I'm using a content presenter that's a standard WPF control. It acts as a placeholder. The user selects whichever provider they want, report they want, whatever. I take the user control, I bind it to the provider content property on my view model, provider content, name's arbitrary. Notify property change to refresh the UI, my user control shows. All right. And now to show you everything that I just said is Steve. No pressure, Steve.
No pressure. Thank you, Charlie. Lots of good stuff there.
Were you number 3? I think so.
3. Yeah.
Yep.
Some of you may have noticed that ArcGIS Pro only lists the 10 most recent projects on its start page. And someone on GeoNet certainly has, and they posted something, and we thought, oh, well, maybe we can turn this, this limitation into a demo for a session. And what we have is, we came up with a custom backstage called Recent Items that will just list every project you've ever opened since the add-in was installed. So right now I've opened up 3 projects so far, and I see them listed here. But beyond that, we thought, oh, how can we show component categories? And we thought, oh, let's make this Backstage tab extensible so that other parties can come into our Recent Items tab and show their own thing. So we have a second add-in in this case that is showing geodatabases. So the second add-in has scanned my whole hard drive in search of geodatabases, and it has listed them here. And again, the first add-in just found the most recent projects.
Can I just add something to that, Steve?
Yeah.
That the UI in the blue box, it's being provided by what Steve is clicking on the list. So that blue rectangle is what is coming in from what he picks on the list.
Right. So we can see, pick a project, open it. All right, well, let's take a look at the code and see how we accomplish this. So in my solution, I have 2 add-ins. I showed the main one called Advanced Categories, and then the client show DDB. Let's look at the DAML for our first add-in. So this is the guy that's going to define the component category. It's going to the extensibility point for other add-ins. First, it has a module, as all add-ins do, and then you see we have our Backstage tab where we're going to host all of our content, and more importantly, we have our category that Charlie just went through. In our case, we have our ID is customization find items, and this add-in is going to register the first child, the first component, and that's the recent projects. So our first add-in does both defines it and puts in our client. This DAML file is from our second add-in, and what we see is update category, and we use the ID that we defined in the first guy. And here we're going to say, okay, we're going to insert our own component into your category, like so. We have the ID, we have our class name, and we have our content. So this is our MVVM pair. Next, let's look at our main module. So this is the main module in the first add-in, the one defining the category. This add-in is set to auto-load at startup. So as soon as Pro starts, this module is going to automatically start. Its initialize function will be called, and here we're going to call a new function, our own function called load components. And as Charlie showed, what load components does is it uses the framework's category get component elements function with our specified ID. This is the string ID of our category to fetch everyone who has registered themselves in our component category. And right now we have those 2 components. So we're going to loop through all of the returned items, basically instantiate them, and we've defined a contract here called iShowFindItems so that we could ask those components for very specific information that we want in our case, namely the name, so we can populate our combo box, and I think it had a description. And we threw on an async initialize function so that we could say that you could delay load, when needed. Embeddable controls dot create. Yeah, that's sorry, cut off. So here's where we're looping through. Whoops. Right here. So while we're looping through the components, so we're handed the components, and then we can say, okay, go and create this guy, and go and create each of our components. So it's up to us to instantiate those objects. And we'll see, as Charlie showed, we get a tuple back of our embeddable control and our user control, so our MVV and pair. And then in our case, we're adding them to a collection so that our UI can access it. Okay, let's look at our recent projects. Here's an example of our embeddable control that's showing the recent projects. And I don't want to dive into what it's doing. It's basically just listening for the open project event, catching that, and then writing out to a file. And then when this component is loaded the first time, if that file exists, it'll read it and it populates the collection based on those projects. So here's, you see an example of it subscribing to an event, and we have an observable collection so that while we're running, if someone opens a project, it'll automatically appear in our list. Okay, let's take a quick look at our backstage. Here's our XAML. So our backstage tab is really almost completely empty. It just has a combo box to list the registered components. Oops, let me scroll up. It just has this combo box, and then it just has a content presenter right here. So it has no idea what's going to appear in the combo box, nor does it have any idea what's going to appear in this content area, because those come from the components themselves. So our first component says, oh, I'm all about projects, and so that'll appear in the combo box, and then he'll stuff his, when selected, he'll stuff use his embeddable control into our content presenter. Or we'll take his content, and stuff it in ourselves. So here's our backstage view model, and you can see the combo box is bound to our custom providers, which is actually down in our main module. So this is more of our model, and this is our view model, and we're just grabbing it from there. And of course, we hold the active item. Let's take a look then at our other client, which is very similar. Whoops, I got all the find items. Oh, I'm in the wrong guy. So this is our second add-in, the client that's going to look for GDBs. And again, we see that he inherits from embeddable controls and implements our custom interface, our contract, so that our main module knows how to communicate with this guy. And the only difference between this guy really is that he loads asynchronously, because we wanted to show an example of like searching your hard drive for stuff. And we never want to block the UI thread. So this guy uses a random thread from the .NET thread pool to go and search your hard drive for anything that's a .gdb. And again, it just populates an observable collection of items. And I know that's a whirlwind tour of the code. We have lots of time for questions. If you want me to go over anything specific, we have time.
Can you just run it, Steve?
Oh yeah, let's.
Breakpoint on the.
We can totally do that.
Customize and see the components coming out of the category.
Okay, so as I said, our module is set to auto load at startup. Normally, modules want to delay load. That is, they won't load until some piece of UI that needs it is touched. So for example, if you click a button, normally only then will that button's parent module load. We call this delay loading, but in our demo, we've changed it so that this module loads right at startup, and we see, okay, so we get our onInitialize function, and we're going to call our load components. looking for a breakpoint here. Is it function F5? Nope.
I think
Control
you just did the
F5.
continue.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yep.
Okay, and then I'll use this guy. So here we ask for our components. We're asking the framework for the components. And then we loop through, and we ask them to be created right here. So we ask the framework to go, oh, you know from the DAML, you know the class name of the two pairs. Go and create those guys and hand them back to me. And then right away we're ensuring that our contract is satisfied. And if so, go ahead and initialize the component, which is just part of the contract. And then we're going to ask it some simple questions. What is your UI piece? These are stuffed into the tuple pair. And what's your label? So project history list, this is the label that's going to appear in the combo box. Right. We'll go back here again. So again, a third add-in can come in and say, oh, well, where's all my SDE connection files? And it could provide that, and it would appear, and we can make it appear here in this recent items tab, or any number of examples that you can.
Yep. Okay. So that is it, and we're open for questions. I think this is.
We got some business cards up here too.
Yeah.
If you want to.
Yep, please.
Can I put out buttons from code behind, like do the runtime, not as a second setting, but I want to add 3 extra buttons on my not as a second add-in, to add demo and so on.
And I'll let Steve comment too. The only way I can think to do that would be that you use a custom control that you put on the ribbon. You provide a content presenter in your custom control, and then you dynamically add 3 WPF buttons to that as needed.
I'm not sure I totally understood. You want to add just 3?
He wants at runtime to dynamically add 3 buttons
Oh,
to
at
the
runtime,
ribbon,
at
to the
runtime.
ribbon, to a tab. Is that correct? So that's how you would do it. That's how I would do it.
I'd have to think about that.
Okay.
Maybe the best approach there, now that I think about it a little bit more, is what we have something called contextual groups. So it's best to define. Do you know it's going to be? If you don't know, if you know it's always going to be 3, it's just a matter of. That's the problem.
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and my only other thought is we have dynamic menus, but we don't really have a dynamic command control. So, yeah, it's going to be.
So the category is kind of something to kind of stew like a crock pot, just digest it, let it sort of sink in, and I think hopefully it's one of those things that maybe 3 months from now, 6 months from now, you'll have this problem and you go like, okay, yeah, that's categories. It may not be something that you immediately have this need for. But it's the first time we've taught it. We haven't really talked about categories ever before, but we sort of wanted to get out there. You may see it when you
extend our own SDK because Pro uses it fairly extensively. I think the editing team exposes
catalog.
A bunch of categories. So where you're not defining it, you'll be registering into the custom sketch tools or whatnot come in through categories.
So, okay. Well, thank you.